Everybody. I'm Regina Bryan, and welcome to the Women of Empowered Living. My guest today and we briefly crossed paths at Keller Williams Realty. And although we didn't know each other well, I knew then she was someone really special. And after noticing her pictures last October on Facebook from her 6th Boston Marathon, I knew she was someone that I wanted to talk to. Teresa Fudge, please welcome to the show. Hey, Teresa, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. So where are you joining us from today?
I am here in Swanee, Georgia.
We're probably, 5 miles, if that, away from each other?
Probably.
So you, like me, we're taking in this rainy, wet Atlanta morning, but I'm so glad to see you.
Always good to see you, Regina.
And when we spoke on the phone, I had to reach out to you because you had the best marathon photos on Facebook that I've ever seen. You were smiling and you were happy. And I thought, I've got to talk to Teresa about this. So tell us first, how did you get started with running?
It was, you could almost say a midlife crisis.
I love it.
So I had not been a runner at all of my life. And I basically got started because I wanted to lose some weight. I had always struggled with those 20 pounds all my life, but it escalated. And finally, I was at that breaking point of, it was the highest number I'd ever seen on the scale. I was just emotionally, physically, mentally just burnt out from work and just life in general. And I bought myself a treadmill as a gift. And, I started walking on it, and that began, you run more, you walk less, you run more, you walk less. And little did I know, it was just whittling away at the weight. And I just started to feel better and better. And so it grew. Wow. As I shrank, it grew.
Which is exactly what you want to happen when you buy a treadmill and
yes,
run more. So this running thing really took off for you. This treadmill really became a defining moment in your life because you became a runner from this. When was your first marathon? Because you have quite the impressive marathon timeline. 6 Boston marathons, 16 total.
So I ran my first marathon actually 8 years ago this week. I went to Savannah, Georgia with a group of, they were new running friends at the time, and I'd only been running in a couple of years. And so my first marathon was the Rock and Roll Savannah in November of 2013. And it was the first time I qualified for the Boston Marathon.
Wow. So let me get this straight. Your first time at a marathon, you qualified for the Boston.
I did.
My first marathon, actually, I did the half marathon for the Rock and Roll Marathon in Virginia Beach. I didn't qualify for anything except the nearest bed, which was exactly what happened when I ran my one and only marathon in Ireland. I qualified for the nearest bed. So for you to qualify for Boston is just huge. How does that work? Were you eligible to go the next year, or when was your eligibility?
So there's a window, and it opens every year. And based on the timing, I was right at the beginning of the qualifying window for the 2015 race. So April of 2015 was when I actually got to run that race. And it seemed like forever.
I bet it did. I bet it did. Now, did you run any between that first one, that Savannah Rock and Roll, and your first Boston? Were there any races in between?
I did. So I went back a year later to run my second marathon, went back to Savannah with some friends. And quite honestly, that day was so different from the first one. I was like, oh no, what have I done? I still have to go run the Boston Marathon now. And I was just about to begin that training for that Boston Marathon in spring of 2015. And yeah, that was, it was a bit scary. But when you start running, you get all these new friends. And so they were all there to say, it's okay. It's only your second marathon, even though the day didn't go. And the funny thing was, I changed everything that day. From everything that I knew that worked, I changed it all.
From your normal running, from your normal routine? What did you mean you changed everything?
Oh, I changed the fuel that I would use during the race, and it was a drastic change. I even changed the way I trained for the marathon. You name it. Because I was new, so this new flashy thing would come along, or I would read this new blog, or watch a new
Shiny
YouTube
object
video.
syndrome. Shiny object syndrome, even in the world of running.
Oh yes, yes, yes. And it was kind of like FOMO. If I don't try this, I'm going to miss out on something. And so yeah, I tried everything new. And what did I do? I went back to what got me there in the first place, and I'm still using most of that right now. So.
It's always about the fundamentals, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Now,
Absolutely.
you belong to the running group right here in our area in Suwanee, Georgia. And
I do, yes.
That's a pretty tight-knit, fierce group of runners. So I want to talk about you coming into that group and the people that you met and how that really helped you continue running and marathons.
So when I was training for my first half marathon through the winter of, I guess, 2011, because I ran my first half in March of 2012. And I did it all by myself. And I was living right near the Suwanee Town Center Park, had no idea that Big Peach Running had this running group that was happening every Tuesday night. And I was driving over to Forsyth County to run on the Big Creek Greenway over there.
Wow.
And I accidentally met a couple at Bonefish. My husband and I having dinner one night, and I overheard their conversation. And so I just introduced myself and we became friends, and they told me about this run group. And so I started going, and the first time I was there, it seemed like an event. Regina, I think there were over 200 runners there that night for a Tuesday night group run.
For a regular, this was not a half marathon. This was not an event. You mean to tell me there are 200 people just on any given Tuesday night?
It was crazy. And a lot of them knew each other. A lot of us didn't know each other. And I was pretty intimidated, but immediately it's funny. I don't know if it's the common suffering or what, but people just like, you're immediately friends with other people that are running. And I became addicted. It was just it's been my Tuesday night thing ever since.
Wow.
And we would celebrate each other. It was just awesome.
So you're there all the time on Tuesday nights running? All
the time.
Wow.
I mean, I miss a couple of things. My husband and I go back and forth to St. Pete, Florida. So when I'm not in town, of course, but Tuesday night is my thing. It really sets the tone actually for the rest of my week.
Since this Suwanee Park that Teresa and I are talking about is so close, I'll just drive by there, Teresa. How about that? I'll drive by and I'll wait.
Absolutely. And any type of encouragement is always welcome.
I'll say, you guys can do it, because I ran one and I think the intention was there to keep going, but my body, I think, had other plans for me. It was not as, my body was not as in tune to all of this as my heart and my mind were. So congratulations, because you did that first one, you did that second one. And let's talk about the Boston. Let's go back to that, because you were not eligible to run the Boston in 2015. Or were you eligible to run the Boston in 2015?
So 2015 was the first year I got to run it. 2013 was the year of the bombing. And so 2014 was that comeback year after that. Yeah.
So let's talk about the 2013. Let's talk about that day, April 15th, 2013, because we talked about your running group. You actually had a friend out there at the Boston Marathon during the bombing. Talk to us about you have this tight-knit group. You guys have people out there. What was that day like for you?
It was, I think we were all really beginning to use Facebook as a communication tool. And so when we have a great Facebook group for our Suwanee Big Peach Runner group, and someone mentioned it, and I'd been out in the car actually working with my husband most of the day. And in the moment I found out, all I could think about was, oh my gosh, that's one of my Tuesday night people. And We just drove immediately to Big Peach Running just to see, could we get some information? Had someone contacted been, and at that point in time, we still didn't know their status, and we wouldn't actually for a couple of hours, but it was really, it was scary, because here I am thinking that this is going to be one of my goals, and the thing, and my husband's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. My parents are like, oh, is this what happens? And then it changed everything for the big events.
I bet it did, because of course my marathon was almost, my one and only was almost 20 years ago. And it was in Dublin, Ireland. And no doubt there's this energy, any of you watching that have run a marathon, there's this energy, there's this excitement on race day that is almost, you almost can't really explain it, can you, Teresa?
Oh, you can't. It's like nothing else.
Really is. So I get why you can become addicted, because it is a surreal moment to be among the group of runners running 26.2 miles. And yet the Boston Marathon, we're all watching. You guys are gathered at Big Tree running. We're watching at home, and we're thinking about all those runners. So what changed for you in your mind as you were preparing to go to Boston? Did anything change? How was the atmosphere in running after that?
Once we knew our people were okay, and they got back, and I heard their stories, it actually intensified that I want to go do this. Once kind of the shock was over that somebody would actually do this, then it was like, you've messed with the wrong group of people.
I love that.
We're not letting you take this from us.
Right.
And it just, I think it brought our group closer. And it's been that way ever since. Then when I got there and I saw the way the city reacted, and it's like, you're not going to hold us down. And it's it's commemorated or memorialized every year, and it's
I bet it made Boston rally around this race like never before.
Oh my.
I mean, talk to us about your first Boston.
So I had never been to Boston, the city, before, but I was pretty familiar with the way they felt about their sports and athletes there. You're a rock star to them. That's from the time you land at the airport, or if you're driving in, the banners, just the message and the energy in the city. And it's held on Patriots Day, which is a day off for everyone. And so the whole city just comes out. I've never been treated like that before by perfect strangers that don't feel like perfect strangers. They just hold you up. It's amazing.
So what was it like at the starting line? I mean, talk to us about that moment right before, because I remember just how there's nothing like that feeling that I'm about to take off and do 26.2 miles. I've never run the Boston, of course, so I can't even imagine what the moment of the start was like for you. Talk to us about that.
It was not the weather day that I had hoped for. It was raining. And it was cool. So they bus you to this big area that they call Athletes Village, and everyone starts from this spot. And until you're there, you don't understand, because it's 30,000 athletes, but it's a little quaint street in New England. And, but it's this huge thing and it happens in waves, but, it was just, I'm sitting in this tent waiting for my starting time, and I'm listening to other runners from all over the world talk about different types of training. And I'm literally, the first thing was like, how did I get here? Oh my gosh, I don't know that I belong here. Even though I knew I had qualified solidly, it just felt like everyone around me was either more talented or more experienced, and so then that fear set in as, oh my gosh, now I have to go do this. But then you line up, and there's the jet flyover and the national anthem, and every runner is so excited for every other runner.
I'm
And
ready
then
to sob. When you talked about the flyover and the national anthem, I'm ready to cry for that moment because it just gives you chills. It just gives you chills. And to be in Boston after the Boston Marathon bombing, when this city was embracing, because we know that it's Boston strong. I mean, come on. They
yeah,
are the tight-knit group. They are rallying around you guys. So you're running this race and tap into some of those emotions or what was going through your head and how you finished.
it was, I was so happy, number one, to find out that I could run in the rain. I'd never had to do that before. I think I had one rainy short run where I got caught out in it, but running in the rain was not something I'd done a lot of. So I was new to that. It's my third marathon, and it was amazing how fast it went by. And I mean, I remembered getting to the top of Heartbreak Hill, knowing that, or technically it's supposed to be all downhill from there to the finish line. Not completely true, but knowing I had climbed the hardest parts of this race and that before long it was going to be over. And I was afraid that I wouldn't remember every single detail because it was a combination of the hardest thing I'd ever done and the greatest day I would ever have. And it was just
that makes me
awesome.
want to cry. Okay, that makes me want to cry because I remember
And
marathon day and there's nothing like it.
nothing like it. Nothing like it.
So your passion just overwhelms me, Teresa, because I know you and I know your spirit, and you talking about that reminds me of my day almost 20 years ago. So that was a moment when you said, "Oh, I'll never forget this," and I'll never forget mine either. So how did you finish? How did you do? And when did you go back for number two?
So it actually became my very best marathon finish up to that point, which out of three was, statistically pretty good. So I had a 3 hour and 45 minute marathon, 3 hours, 45 minutes,
Are
zero
you kidding
seconds.
me? Are you kidding? I
And
cannot even embarrass myself and give my time then.
so that requalified me for the next year. And I was just so amazed and just in awe of this big event. And I told my husband then that I wanted to do this every year I could possibly do this. And so knowing that I was solidly requalified for the next year was just an awesome feeling. And so I went back in 2014.
And how did that compare to the first one?
Weather-wise, it was just the opposite. It was a sunny day and warm. And by this time, I had learned enough about myself to know that I prefer a cold day. So I had something else to learn about, and that was dealing with the heat. And I actually taught myself in that race to manage the temperature and manage my hydration. And so I ran another personal best at my second Boston Marathon. So that day was a 3 hour and 43 minute and some change Boston Marathon. And so I was requalified for the next one.
Wow.
And
Oh
so
my
this kept just rolling up.
And did you run in between the second and then going to the third Boston? Did you run any other races as a method of training in between?
I'm trying to remember what I did. I've run several. Well, this past one was my 16th marathon. I probably ran something that was practice, but I do a lot of the local races, 5Ks, 10Ks, try to do a half marathon or two, because the race muscle is something that you have to train as well. It's one
Ooh,
thing
that's
to
so
run the
sad.
distance, but if you're watching the clock and you do have that goal time, you have to exercise the race muscle. And that was something I was learning about at that time period. And I was training with a coach at the time. So he
Wow.
was helping me learn to make those adjustments and to learn about what's different between flipping that switch on race day from that 20-mile run around Swanee.
Wow. So there's actual there's actual mental as well as physical methods and training that you have to do. So were you using those methods to always increase your personal best? Were there any moments where your personal best just didn't happen as each Boston Marathon or each marathon went on?
Yes. And I'm going to use a phrase that you're familiar with. I was failing forward.
We know
At a
that
pretty good
well,
pace. So another big marathon that was on my radar is the New York City Marathon.
Oh, yeah.
Boston is known as the oldest and most prestigious marathon. But because at that point in time, it was the 120 something, consecutive year. New York not being as old. In fact, they're about to run this weekend, the 50th, but it's the largest. And so Boston's 30,000 runners. New York is 60,000 runners. And the way you get into New York, there's three ways. You can just sign up for their lottery where they just pull your name out of a hat, or you can qualify in on time like Boston, or you can fundraise, which is the other way you get into Boston. And it's notorious for breaking people's hearts trying to get into that lottery. And so I had been doing that every year, trying to get in through the lottery. And my coach and I said, you know what, I need a new goal. Let's try to get in on time. And at that point in time in my age group, I had to run 15 minutes faster to get into the New York City Marathon.
So the qualification is stricter at New York City than in Boston, I guess, because of the number of people trying to get into that race.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Wow.
And it's another international race. So there's runners from all over the world that want to come, and it has its own identity because it's New York City, and you run through all 5 boroughs, and they're also unique and and the bridges. Oh my gosh, the bridges. And so as hard as it is, it's something that people just, they're trying to get in one way or the other. And so I was running marathons to not only keep qualified for Boston, but to try to get me into that New York City Marathon.
Oh my gosh. And so are you still on track to try to get into New York City? Is that going to become a goal? Is that a goal of yours every year?
Well, I actually met that goal back in December of 2016. I ran my personal best marathon, and that number still stands. So I needed a sub 338 to get me into New York City. And that could be 337.59. So technically that was my goal on that race day in December of 16. And that day I ran a 336.30.
Oh my gosh. And how was that? How does New York City compare to Boston? Not just in terms of the actual physical terrain, the difference in city. How does that compare to someone like yourself, Teresa, that's a runner? How do you kind of define the differences in those two races for yourself?
It's an amazing day. New York has, the race finishes in Central Park. Mm. And because you do run through all 5 boroughs, I remember we were at the expo, me and my husband, when we got there, and for some reason the race felt bigger to me, like it felt longer than the distance. And I know that it's 26.2 because that's what a marathon is, but it just felt big. And so it was intimidating. And I purposefully did not study the course. I knew there were bridges. I knew what I was going to do, but I did not pay close attention to the course. And we were at the expo in the Javits Center, and they had this huge digital screen where they had this 3D flyover of the event. And I'm not paying attention to it. And I noticed my husband is studying it and he's watching it. And he turns to me and he says, "Oh my goodness, have you seen this?" And he's got that look of concern on his face. And I said, "No, I haven't."
And you're not
to. And it's a big race. It's a big race. And just with so many people, but it's worth every second of it.
Oh, and so since you started Boston, have you qualified every year? And like you said, I guess your goal is to continue to go just as much as you can every single year, just as long as you're able to.
as long as I'm able. So I had a little hiccup. My streak was broken in 2019, or actually at the 2018 race, which was special. I had just lost my mom back in January of 2018, and I had a shortened training period. So when I went to the race on April 16th, 2018 in Boston, it's now known as the worst weather ever for the race. It was a monsoon. It
Oh
just
my God.
rained. It was crazy. But that day was significant to me because it would have been my parents' 50th wedding anniversary.
Oh, Teresa.
So the day was special, and I gave it everything I had, and unfortunately came up short. And so I would miss the 2019 Boston Marathon. I still had some time to qualify, but what I didn't realize was I had an injury coming that rose its ugly head in the summer of 18 after Boston in April. And so I spent some months rehabbing, not a major injury, but it was more of a learning
Yeah.
situation. So, but it kept me out of the 2019 race. But my husband, being the gracious man he is, sent me to experience the event as a spectator with my friends who were running their
Oh,
first. So I got to go, but I did not get to race in 2019. I had to wait until 2020, which I did requalify for the 2020 race. Unfortunately, the world had other plans. And
yeah.
so the
I was
race
going to
was,
ask you, was it a virtual race? What did they do for the 2020 Boston Marathon?
so it got delayed first to October of 2020. And then, of course, it just became clear that that was not going to be a good date. So they made the race virtual. And I ran it here in Swanee, Georgia, with the help of some friends and my husband, who is my portable, he's my rolling support system with my water and fuel, and he does this
I
for our
love
whole
that.
group.
He's part of the support team.
He absolutely is. He makes the engine run. And so there were several other friends that were running virtual events, and we supported each other on different days. And we had these incredible toilet paper finish lines. So everyone got to break the tape of their events, and we've celebrated. And sadly, there was that feeling of loss, and we mourned the big events, and the no flyovers, the no bus rides, the no screaming spectators.
It's a
But
tough one.
we
That's
all
pretty.
did the best we could for each
Yeah.
other and got through it.
And then you ran this past year, the 2021 Boston. And now that that was back live again, after experiencing it virtual, on your own, Swanee, Georgia, and then you were back in Boston for the 2021. What was that like in this post-COVID, kind of coming out of COVID world? What were the changes that you noticed? And did they impact you at all?
There were quite a few changes. Still the bus ride out to the starting line, because you're going to run from Hopkinton into Boston, so we can't change the course. There were things changed, COVID testing, vaccine verification. The start process was probably the biggest change for me. Instead of being tightly packed in a group that's going to run together and help you attain pace and maintain pace, basically it was a rolling start, and you just started.
So that
And
not too many
so
of you were starting and cuddled together at the start. You had to kind of pace everybody. They paced everybody out.
it was their intention was well.
Yeah.
It just didn't work that way. And
Right.
so I started with runners that were going to run faster than me. I started with runners that were going to run slower than me. And I had mentally prepared myself for this change. My fear had been that I would struggle to come up to pace and just feel like I'm playing catch up for a long time, which is mentally draining.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I ran out too fast, and dug a pretty deep hole pretty quickly. So my race didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, but it was a magical day in the city. It was so obvious that Boston as a city, as a people, everything was so ready for the event to be back. And it was just awesome. Just the spectators, the love, the excitement.
You're right, because you guys are treated like rock stars in
Oh
Boston.
my goodness. It's
You
just
can't go
like
anywhere,
nothing
and
else.
you're just beloved as runners of the Boston Marathon. You're beloved everywhere you go in and around that city.
It's and the unicorn as their logo is just so recognizable that if you have one on from any year, it doesn't matter. Maybe you ran one 20 years ago. If you have that unicorn and folks just love you, they love that race. It is so well supported. It doesn't matter if it's pouring down rain or blistering hot. People come out and they want to call your name. They're ringing cowbells. They're high-fiving you. It's whatever they need to do to support you. They're giving it 110%.
I have no doubt about that. You make me want to go run and qualify for the Boston, because that marathon experience, there's truly nothing like it. And I can't even imagine having that in Boston. So what's on your agenda for marathons for 2022? What's coming up for you this year?
So the one thing I did learn about the last 2 years, and I learned it in Boston, is, and we, like I spoke of, you have to train that race brain and that race method. So one of the things that was obvious to me after my race in Boston was that the lack of racing is affecting us all right now. There's, as a whole, you can look at finish times and just in conversation with other runners, everyone is feeling a little sluggish, maybe a little heavier than they normally would be because of the lack of racing. So I'm going to keep training that race brain. So I'm going back to one of my favorite races, December the 11th in Huntsville, Alabama. That's the place where I ran my fastest marathon in 2016. And I'm going to try to qualify for the 2023 Boston. The window is already closed for 22. So that one is I'll let that one be, but I'm going to go try that qualifier in December in Huntsville. And worst case scenario, I'll end up with another tool in my tool belt. I'll learn something else about myself or about the sport, about the race. Best case scenario, I'll have a great day and have that qualifier in the books.
Your passion is coming through. I mean, you really, Teresa, talking to you on the phone and talking to you now, I get inspired by you, not just to say I should go run another marathon, because that may not happen. I get inspired by you just to be all that I can be at whatever I do. That's really what I noticed about you. That's really what drew me to you on those Facebook photos, where you were giving this marathon everything you had. And that's an inspiration no matter what we're working towards.
Oh,
so
thank you for saying that.
Oh, it was just, I mean, it was coming through loud and clear on those pictures, just how happy you were, how purposeful you were, and just your passion. So I love to ask all my guests one final question. So Teresa, what does an empowered life mean to you?
So probably before I started running, I didn't have a good idea what that was. I had been feeling like life was kind of out of control. And I have learned through this sport that there's a balance of, we can make decisions every day that equip us to deal with the things we cannot control. And
oh, wow, that's good.
And I try to, some days I'm a lot better at that than others, but just, and it's so funny that running is so, it's a great metaphor for life. You get out of it what you put into it, and it starts, you like, it's kind of like eating an elephant, one bite at a time, one step at a time, and it grows. But just through working training plans and seeing results has just taught me that I can empower myself. And when the things that I cannot control come at me, there are things that I can control to equip myself to get the best result. And that's what it feels like or looks like to me to live that empowered life.
And you, my dear, are living it. I am so grateful that you could join me today. Thank you so much for being here, Teresa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a subject I could talk about a lot because it means so much to me. So thank you for letting me share that.
Oh, thank you, Teresa. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.